Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Creative Confidence Podcast. I'm Suzanne Gibbs Howard, founder of IDEO, and I am very excited to have you here today. We will be having one of our conversations with a special guest about creativity, leadership, innovation, and growth. And I am always happy to include the larger community in this conversation. So please go ahead and get started getting involved by sharing in the chat who you are and where you happen to be today. So welcome to everyone. And an extra special welcome to our guest today. Erica Keswin is going to be talking with us about the power of rituals at work. She's an author and workplace strategist. And so we are very excited to have her here. Welcome, Erica.
Thank you so much.
And I can see we've got people from the
gosh,
globe
everywhere.
well covered everywhere from the Grand Canyon to Michigan, Calgary, Bulgaria, Switzerland, Spain, the UK, Denmark, Omaha, Nebraska, Quebec.
Wow, Vietnam.
Barcelona, Vietnam. So thank you, everyone. We are thrilled to have this community here with us today. All right, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about Erica. So for the past 20 years, Erica has been working with some of the world's most iconic brands. She's a trusted guide and consultant on a couple of particular issues. She's working to help companies deeply connect their teams, very much focused on employee engagement, which we all know is a hot button issue in today's employee dominated workforce. And she's all about creating a more human workplace, which I can't get behind more than anything else. She's the author of 2 best-selling books, Bring Your Human to Work, and also the one we're going to be talking about more today. This is called Rituals Roadmap. It is about the human way to transform everyday routines into workplace magic. And so when I got a look at this book and started reading it, I was fascinated to meet Erica myself. I've always been passionate about rituals for decades. I've studied them in religious conflict and political situations. I've worked with them in IDEO as a powerful form of bringing leadership into any situation. You can see more about that in our course, Leading for Creativity by IDEO. But I really valued Erica's insights on rituals in the workplace. And so today we're going to talk with her about the business case for rituals, about the elements of rituals, about lots of examples that she has from her extensive research, and also share with you some techniques and tips for how to design your own rituals in your workplace. So very excited to get to all of that. Erica, I would love it if you would start us off by just giving us your definition of a ritual and also telling us about how you started to get interested in rituals.
Great. Well, I'm excited to dive right in. So a lot of my work was inspired by a study that I read when I started doing research on the human workplace. I've been in the human capital space for over 25 years. And the study came out of Cornell University, and it was done by a guy named Kevin Niffen. And Kevin was studying team performance. What makes one team higher performing than another team? And his dad was a firefighter, and he grew up hanging out in the firehouses, with the other firefighters. And so when he was getting his PhD at Cornell, he decided to study the firefighters as part of his work. And the short version of what he found was that the firefighters who were the most dedicated to the ritual of the firehouse meal, of sitting around the table, bonding, connecting as themselves, it actually correlated with higher levels of performance, and those firefighters saved more lives. So I'm reading this, and I've always been a connector by nature. And it was sort of this goosebump moment for me, really looking at, the ROI, the impact of rituals. And that began, my research and really obsession with rituals. And so my working definition of a ritual in the book has 3 parts. The first is a ritual is something to which we assign a certain amount of meaning and intention. Mm-hmm. Number 1. Number 2, with a ritual, there's typically a regular cadence. And so it's something that perhaps we do every morning. Perhaps it's something that we do with our team once a week. With the firefighters, they work in what's called a tour. So they either work, from 9 to 6 or 6 to 9. And so they either have lunch or dinner together. So that is that cadence. The third part, though, was something that I hadn't really considered when I think about a ritual. And that is, a ritual is something that typically goes beyond its practical purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And so what do I mean by that? I'm sitting here in my home office, and let's say the lights go out and I light a candle to see what I'm doing. That's not a ritual. But if I light a candle, every day at 6 to signify the demarcation between my work time and my home time, there's no practical purpose with that candle. I can perfectly well see what I'm doing, but there's meaning and intention in it for me. And I do it every day at 6, or I do it every Friday at 6 to, demarcate the weekend with the work week. And, we'll get into this, I'm sure, but with hybrid work and the pandemic and this increasingly blending of work and home, these kinds of rituals have become that much more important.
Yeah.
So that's my definition.
I love that. So it's the symbolic nature, it's the repeatedness, and then it's about that purpose being larger than anything that seems logical or practical. Exactly. I think that's so true. And I know one of the other things that I also love about rituals is that they often help people in times of great ambiguity, either high change or when they're struggling with finding a sense of meaning in the situation. So they can be really powerful in those situations. Mm-hmm. Sure. Could you, I really valued your thinking on and your research into the business rationale, the business case for rituals. So I wonder if you could share more about that for people who might be either themselves questioning the value of this or working in situations or contexts where other people might not necessarily be ready to put some resources and energy behind creating workplace rituals.
Yeah, 100%. Being in the human capital space, I always want to focus on finding that ROI, the business case, that both the science and the stories of connection at work. And so as I was doing all of the research on rituals, I created an equation that I call the 3 Ps of rituals. And this is what rituals give us. The first P is that rituals give us a sense of psychological safety. Sounds like a S, but starts with a P. Thank goodness, or I couldn't call it the 3 Ps. But rituals give us this sense of belonging and coming together. The second P is purpose. Rituals give us an opportunity to connect to purpose and to connect to values. And actually, I saw there was a comment in the chat from Macco, and you're talking about that, about linking rituals to values, which I'm sure we'll get into. It's often the most stickiness. So psychological safety plus purpose, you add those two together and you get an increase in performance, which is the third P, and the ROI. So I like to look at that in 2 ways. First, personally in our home lives, and then from a team or from a work perspective. In our personal lives, we, when we feel connected to others or even to ourselves, our oxytocin, that feel-good hormone, goes up, and our cortisol, our stress, goes down, which is probably what you were alluding to before. When we're in these turbulent times, that rituals can really ground us. And so there's a lot of science and research around the impact of rituals on our health and wellness, and again, lowering stress. From the work perspective, there's so many studies that are in the book, but there's everything from when we feel that sense of belonging and connection and trust with our manager, collaboration goes up by as much as something like 46%. Productivity goes up. And so, the numbers are there, and it's about bringing these rituals, to our workplaces with intention.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think we can totally see why now in our turbulent times and the highly interconnected places that we're all working in, yet at the same time trying to figure out how to work remote, work in new ways, why rituals are more important than ever. But I know you've been thinking and writing about this, and I wonder if you have any more to share about, if you haven't gotten to rituals yet, why now's the time?
I think it's exactly what you were saying. I mean, someone said to me yesterday, they're like, okay, after Labor Day, we're sort of, this is our new normal. And for so many of us, we've gone for 2.5 years now, 3 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And I think Amy Cuddy out of Harvard coined the term pandemic flux syndrome, which really is just causing so much stress and angst and anxiety because we're kind of all over the place. And a piece of what rituals can do is ground us to each other, to our families, to our friends, to our teams, and even to ourselves. And so, if you haven't thought about rituals, I would say now is the time. I would say for that reason. The other reason, when we think about the ROI of our businesses, and I think we're going to put it in the notes, I wrote an article for HBR a couple of months ago called How to Design a Day in the Office That's Worth the Commute, because many companies are having trouble getting people to come in or figuring out how to connect hybrid teams. And rituals are an unbelievable way to do it. And I know we're going to share so many stories and examples, and they don't have to cost anything. So those would be two reasons now to think of it just for our own sanity and stress, but also for our teams.
Nice. So I know that's super helpful. And I love your simple equation of the 3 Ps: psychological safety, purpose leads to increased performance. And so we've got a lot of rituals that are about turbulent times, as you write in your book, but you also have a bunch of other hotspots in an organization or in a culture where you might insert a ritual. And I wonder if you could share a little bit more about those places or moments. And for our community, I'd love for you to listen in, and if there's something that resonates with an area that you're thinking, I could really use some help or an example there, let us know in the chat. And Erica's just got a litany of examples from her research that we can dive into. So Erica, first, share with us the places where you see rituals as common patterns.
Great. So the way that I came up with the structure of rituals roadmap was based on what people were telling me in the interviews. And I would kind of go through a discussion very similar to that we're having right now. What is a ritual? What is the ROI? And sometimes the leaders still wasn't sure if something was a ritual. And so as you're doing these interviews, you figure out different ways to ask the same question. And I came up with this, I call it a magic question, because literally, I think 10 times out of 10, maybe 9 times out of 10, when I asked it, I could see almost like the light bulbs coming out of people's heads going, that's it. That's our ritual. So the magic question for all of you here today, you get to hear it live. It's funny. It's so not technical and so analog, but really magical. So the question is, and I'll use sort of IDEO as the example, when do you feel most IDEO-ish? When do you feel most Chipotle-ish, LinkedIn-ish, all the different companies in the book. And when I asked it, the answers that I got clustered around all of these different aspects of the employee experience. And so when you ask that question, where are these opportunities for rituals? Think about the employee experience journey. And so I ended up, based on the answers to that question, starting at the beginning of the journey. I have rituals in recruiting and onboarding, rituals in meetings, rituals in eatings per the firefighters, professional development, celebrating milestones. And then the last thing I'll say, and we can dig into whichever piece of it you want to, I often say that beginnings and endings are what I call prime rituals real estate. And so they're really magical places to think about it with our teams or in our own lives, what you do in the morning, what you do at the end of the day. So that's really how the book is structured. And there's all of these cool examples from all different kinds of companies that cut across that employee experience.
Yeah, I love that, thinking about the entire journey of the employee and all of these key moments, especially beginnings and endings. When you think about like the classic rituals and in anthropology are rites of passage, which are beginnings and endings. And those are notoriously liminal and ambiguous states. So rituals help to guide people. Very cool. So community, I can see a few of you are already sending in a few ideas. Maybe let's start off with rituals that help people to navigate turbulent times. I know you've got a lot of things, and you were doing a lot of this research in the midst of the height of the COVID epidemic. So, I'm actually going to share an example that's not in the book, which is very new, and we can put another link in the chat from an article that I just wrote about a couple of weeks ago.
Whether you're in the human capital space or any type of a leader in the organization, one of the shifts I've seen is that the onus is now on us to help the people in our organization navigate turbulent times. A lot of it started after the death of George Floyd. Many organizations after, the reversal of Roe v. Wade, felt like we have to help people think about this. And so I was actually at a conference and I met a woman named Judith Harrison, who is at a company called Shenwick Weber. And, one of the magical things about rituals, sometimes the most powerful rituals don't even start by someone saying, okay, we're going to create a ritual. Like there's something that someone just does and there's a stickiness and it sort of goes viral or is really connected to the company values. So after George Floyd, Judith started offering employees a time to come to connect with each other. And she would write something about whatever the issue was. She would share some resources and some things that the organization was doing to support it, whether, the issue at hand, whether it was financially or psychologically. And she just welcomed people in. And when she wrote this little memo, what I thought was so cool was she did this without even thinking that this was going to be a ritual per se. At the end of each, little monologue that she did before she opened it up for connection, she said, and my question to all of you is, how are you feeling? And I just when she told me, got these goosebumps and kind of put it out there. And it's almost like we're doing today with a couple, hundreds of people on this. Some people would, unmute and talk. Others would use the chat function, and she kind of would see how it goes and would moderate it. And this over time became a ritual and became something called time to connect. And literally 200 to 400 people every month. And with some of the stuff that's been going on in the world, sadly, there have been multiple sessions a month during some of the most recent months with a lot of the shootings, that people come together and support and connect with each other. And how do you know it's a ritual? People would really, really miss it if it went away. People literally when there's a ritual that is so sticky, and if it didn't happen, and there's so many other examples I could share about it, people would think, oh my gosh, are they selling the company? Like, what has gone on? And that's how institutionalized it comes. So, we can share the link from it, but it's very, very recent. This article was just published, but I think we're all experiencing these turbulent times. And whether it's just with your team or the whole organization, it could even be 5 minutes before your staff meeting, where you build this.
Yeah, lovely. I think that's so nice. And what's so interesting there to me, on top of just this moment in this ritual, is that it kind of just emerged. That leader was just designing for that particular moment, but her attention was there to realize how much that was, and probably her team, to realize how much that was resonating with the employees. And so then they ritualized it after the fact. So sometimes it might just be having your spidey sense up, knowing when something is really striking a chord, and then turning it into a ritual by branding it, calling it something, and starting to make it repeatable. Yep. That's super, super interesting. I think we're seeing from some people that they're curious to hear about the moment of onboarding. So the beginnings for a new employee, especially when we're in this remote or hybridized workforce. How do you really welcome people in? And do you have examples around that?
Yeah. So I'm obsessed with onboarding, even more so now than I was before. I haven't not announcing it yet, but I'm actually working on a new book, and onboarding is going to be a big, big piece of it. So you all will have my contact information. So if anybody has any great things to share about onboarding, I'm in the interview process as we speak. But I do think, this idea of how do you start as you mean to go on? And how do you connect people from day one or even before day one with the values and with the soul and the essence of your company, especially when you're hardly meeting people in person these days? So here are a couple of my favorite, again, pretty recent onboarding examples. One came from Ariana Huffington at Thrive. And one of the questions they ask in the onboarding process is, what do you like to do outside of work? And how can we support you? And I think with people having all this time at home over the last couple of years to really think about who they are and what they want and their purpose and all of these different things that a lot of times we were all spinning like a hamster that we didn't have time to think about, why go to a company, or why should a company feel like they can't support us both at work and at home until you've been there 6 months, or until you've been there a year? And with the way turnover is, it might be too late. And so bringing this into the conversation in the beginning, I think, is so, so powerful. So that's one. A second one, I literally just heard about on a different podcast a couple of days ago. So it is hot off the press. It's a company called Gusto. And I just think this is the coolest thing. So let's say you offer somebody, this is even before onboarding, let's say you offer someone a job. And most case, the recruiter, whether it's an external recruiter, an internal recruiter, calls me up and says, Erica, oh my God, this woman, Jaden, works at Gusto. All right, well, you'll have to tell me, I hope this is true. Keep me honest, and please reach out to me, because I'm dying to talk to someone there. So from what I've heard, and again, Jaden may know better than I do, is that typically if I get a job, someone will say, Erica, we're so happy to have you. But at Gusto, everybody, the whole team of people that interviewed you gets on that call when they're offering you the job and says, you know what, we are so excited to have you. And each person shares why they think you would be a great fit for the organization. And then in the podcast, when I was listening to this, somebody said, even if, let's say, I didn't vote, I wasn't so sure about Suzanne, but we're hiring her. And so I'm even part of that process. And talk about bringing a sense of belonging in even before day one. And yeah, Jaden says, yes, we do. I just did an offer celebration this week. Okay, so I'm dying to talk to you, Jaden. This is like so zeitgeist, meant to be. But for all of you, and everybody's saying that's such a great idea, this stuff doesn't have to be rocket science. And yes, it costs a little bit of everybody's time, but talk about starting as you mean to go on. So what was the name of it's Ezra Klein's podcast. No, it's not. I'm going to find it. It was, hold on. All right. I'll find the podcast.
Can share it out.
And we will share it after.
Yeah, definitely. That is so cool. And I know Gusto as well. They're a local company for me, and really, really fascinating in terms of their culture. We have some questions also about knowledge transfer. I know this isn't necessarily something that you've written about, but I can't imagine you haven't seen really interesting knowledge transfer rituals. And I know this is super relevant also with higher turnover that we're seeing in the workplace. So if we've talked about beginnings, what about ends, and not losing the base of knowledge that person has created?
Yeah. So a couple of things that I think about as it relates to knowledge transfer. I mean, there are the GitLabs of the world, right? The remote first companies who are obsessively documenting, that everything gets documented, and literally everything. And so knowledge transfer is not even an issue, because it's just the way that they work together. And I just spoke to Darren Murph, who's their head of remote learning. And, he's been on so many of these different podcasts, and really has become one of the leading experts in managing some of the fully remote first companies. And what he shared with me, and I thought was really interesting, one of my other things, and I've written about it in both books, it's about how do we match the message to the medium? We have all this different kinds of technology, and we need to really be strategic about what should be an email, what should be a phone call, what should be on Slack, what should be on all of these different things. And I do think as we go back to if we're going back sort of in person or hybrid, we have to think about these things on a whole other level. What blew me away about what he said, and this is directly related to knowledge transfer, was, many people use Slack and to be able to capture everything forever. But at GitLab, they specifically say, we're only going to keep, everything. They strategically say we're using Slack for connection, and we're going to have our dog channel and our NBA channel and our this channel or that channel. And after a certain amount of time, we are transferring it over, to GitLab, to our other platform, to institutionalize it. So, and it's very connected to their values. So, let's say we're all on, I don't know, the dog channel or whatever it is, and all of a sudden something kind of work related comes up, and we start kind of on a different, tangent. At some point, someone will say, we need to move this over, because they know that from a medium perspective, everything is going to get deleted. And so that's one example. I would also,
and I would imagine there's also a moment where they decide it's time. This is worth institutionalizing. And so that's ritualistic in itself.
Yes. 100%. I would also say, when I think about knowledge transfer rituals, there's a whole chapter in the book on professional development. And, it's something that, again, I'm obsessed with onboarding, and I'm very focused and interested in professional and personal development. People want to grow on the job up, down, and sideways. And if we don't proactively think about ways to help people grow within our organizations and creating an ecosystem for growth, trust me, they are going somewhere else to get that new opportunity. And so, the knowledge transfer piece is, just having these ongoing conversations about the organization, the different groups, cross-pollination. And so, I'll stop here and you can direct me, but I do think that,
that's great.
I'm happy to give more details. And I do have one of my favorite rituals, which happens to be a professional development ritual, which I can share, but want to make sure I get to exactly what you want me to focus on.
Yeah, no, this is great. And you're making me want to share one of the rituals that we've had at IDEO, and it sort of emerged. We wanted to make sure that, in addition to everything IDEO always did at IDEO, we were a learning center. We were a learning business. That's what we were giving to the world. And we needed to have that at the roots of our culture. And so Madeline Armstrong, the chief of staff, really had this great moment where she said, okay, we're going to have a couple of times a month, we'll have this gathering. It was around lunch back in the day. And we called it business card B-sides, where it was started off as somebody from the team sharing something that's like on the backside of their record, right? The backside of their business card. It's not their main business skill, but it's something else that they did. And so we had a lot of really fun presentations and teaching each other around how to be a DJ, how to rock climb, all these kinds of things. But in addition to that, then we started seeing that sometimes somebody wanted to teach something that they actually did for work. And so we started things that were a little bit more the front side of your business card. So it would be the basics of digital marketing, or how to land metrics, or how to set OKRs. And so it was really just this culture of teaching that kept going and has been helpful as people come and go, or people go on maternity leave. And how do you have time for this kind of knowledge transfer? That's really fun. I know we're going to get to even more questions from our community, but I had one more that I wanted to ask you about when there's times where rituals emerge and become ritualized, but there are times that you construct it. And you've talked a little bit about your magic question, but then what? You're a leader. You're like, I need to create a ritual around welcoming new employees or knowledge transfer. How would you proceed from there?
Yeah. So I would, if I'm the leader and I have 10 people on my team, I would ask them all that question. When do you feel most, IDEO-ish? I mean, think of the example that you just gave, and say, you know what, we really we're trying to revamp our onboarding. People haven't met each other. We're, bringing new people in. How can we bring some of that to the forefront? Because rituals can come from anywhere, top down, bottom up, inside out. And what I would say, you can, hopefully buy the book, but, think about those buckets. Like, we could start in meetings. We could start in professional development. We could start on that first day of onboarding. And, and pick one of the values that you really, really want to highlight. The other thing I would say is that if you start something and it doesn't have that stickiness, we all need to take our egos out of it, because we can't force feed a ritual. That there is this authenticity and organic nature to a ritual. It's a pull more of a push. And so if you start something with your team, Allbirds has a ritual in the book called 40 at 4, where it started very organically, where a guy in the office started having health issues and went to the doctor and set a goal for himself to do a certain amount of push-ups from, between that day and the end of the year. And he divided that number by the number of days left in the year. And he's like, okay, if I do 40 push-ups every day between now and the end of the year, I'm going to hit my goal. This is pre-pandemic. He started doing them in the office. The guy next to him joined, the woman down the hall joined. Before they knew it, 40 at 4 was a thing. And I reached out. The last chapter in the book has a whole focus on, during the pandemic, I had time to re-interview people. And so they were doing it online, and it gave people a sense of belonging. So if somebody's listening to this and says, oh, I'm going to show up on, the Tuesday after Labor Day and start doing push-ups in the office, that might work for your culture, but people might also think you're kind of crazy. And so just be willing to be flexible and sort of, see what sticks and get feedback.
Yeah. That's great. I love that Allbirds example. I want to go deeper into some of the questions. We have lots pouring in. So I want to start with one from Julia. There's some great context here. And she's asking about, at the first level, what do you see as the difference between workplace ritual and then personal or spiritual life ritual? But I want to share a little bit of her thinking here, is that she's really trying to understand, in this space of belonging and connection, certain things belong at work and certain things might, essentially, in my words, make people feel more alienated. And so do you have any sort of structure for thinking about good workplace rituals as opposed to things that might get too personal? Is there a line?
I mean, yeah, we could spend like an hour on that question. I love that question. I think about it around rituals, but I also think it around the whole, context of just bringing your human to work. People will say to me, my whole human, really? This is still work. And so I say it's bringing your best human to work, within a professional context. So that's sort of one answer to the question. That being said, when I interviewed leaders during the pandemic, within a team or within an organization, employee engagement was through the roof when leaders began to be more open and sharing pieces of themselves. And, there are many, I can give you a few examples. So I think it's within, for everybody, it's different. For everyone's team, it's different. Again, solicit feedback to say if, people feel uncomfortable. I don't think people necessarily be praying in the office. There is sort of this line of, religion. That being said, take 3 deep breaths, a moment of silence. Eileen Fisher, they ring a chime before every meeting. And I also share some of the science behind it and share sort of, why we're doing it. And to say, to again, bring people into the fold and get feedback. That's
super helpful.
I was going to say one more quick thing. A few of the leaders, Bill Konigsberg from Horizon Media started a ritual during the pandemic called the Bill Daily, where he shared, and many leaders did, the more that they shared about what was going on in their own lives during this time. He said he's never gotten better feedback really on anything. And I heard this from many leaders. And so what I urge everybody to think about on this call is, I don't want to go back to March of 2020, but I don't want to forget what we saw, what we heard, and how we felt. And so within that continuum of, yes, it's work, but people also want to feel connected, and it's harder being hybrid. So, and not everybody's as comfortable. So test it out. But I urge you to try to bring more of the personal in.
Yeah, there are a lot of questions flying around about the role of vulnerability in rituals. And I love what you're saying about you have to play with that boundary as a leader, put yourself out there. Was that too far? Was that not far enough? And I'm curious if you have found some moments where somebody went too far with vulnerability and backed up from it, or where they were happily surprised by what vulnerability brought about in connecting their workforce.
I would say, I'm sure there's examples of both, but I would say the people that are coming to me, maybe because it's a positive, that's my focus tends to be looking for, things that are working. I have seen almost across the board people being unbelievably surprised. I just met and will be interviewing Hayden Brown from the company Upwork. And she even talked about during the pandemic, she started doing these Friday videos, and just it's bringing herself and letting people see a little window into your life. And so I would say it's from what I've been hearing, and I guess I'm curious with this group, it's such an engaged group today. I can't even believe it. I want to stay on for like 2 hours. That people really, they are craving that connection.
Yeah. And I love, I want to give a shout out to Dino, because ritual and vulnerability doesn't necessarily mean busting into tears and telling your deepest, most heartfelt story. Dino's sharing that his team meetings end with a dad joke. And that is another kind of sharing a little bit more of yourself with your community at work. And that's a really lovely, humor-filled way to do it. So it doesn't have to mean like striking the heart chords every single time.
No, not at all. And it's funny. And a friend and a colleague at Microsoft shared, she just moved to a new team and had hired a lot of new people. So she started a new ritual, which I thought was so cool. And it stuck. I mean, she had once a week in their team meeting, a different person shared their origin story, which I thought even just the way she phrased it was so cool. And you could get people that roll their eyes and think this is ridiculous, but everybody approached it differently. And when they got to the end, like the last person, they said, someone said, "Oh my God, what's going to be our next question?" And so that's again when you can, solicit this.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add, if I could, because I know I saw there were a bunch of people like pinging in about that professional development ritual. So I feel like guilty if I don't share it.
I wanted to ask about that.
Okay, good. So I'm going to share 2 quick ones. So one is from a company, Udemy. So it is an online learning company. So they are very interested and focused on learning. Yet a lot of companies I've been working with and consulting for have adopted this ritual, and it's called DEAL, DEAL, drop everything and learn. And there was a comment in the chat also about, I don't have a budget for this kind of thing. This, a lot of these rituals around professional development truly don't have to cost anything. So for Udemy, once a month at 3:00 on a Wednesday, everybody drops what they're doing and learns. And they, it's Udemy, so they could take an online learning class, they could read a book, and they could really do whatever they want. And what's cool about it is a couple of things. Number one, when you're thinking about rituals, and if these kinds of things are important to you, especially around professional development, don't do them at 7:00 at night. Build it into the workday and show that this is something that you care about and is valued. So sort of number one. Number two, we know that we want people to develop. Number three, if you're a manager, it's a great opportunity to bring people back together and have conversations about, well, what did everybody learn this month? And, what I assumed, maybe, and I was wrong, that a lot of people during that drop everything and learn would learn something that was tangentially related to their job, but they were all different and they were all celebrated. And the goosebump moment that I got during the pandemic was that somebody shared, like literally with tears in her eyes, that she couldn't go to her sister's house for Thanksgiving. And this was in October. And during the October deal hour, she had never made a turkey and had always gone to her sister's, and now she couldn't. And she took an hour class and got recipes and was prepping on how to figure out how to make a turkey. And they could talk about that. And so again, they're all different ways to curate connection.
Lovely. That's great. I'm a big fan of workplace learning, so I think that one's really, really great. I'm curious, Martha and others are asking about engagement and participation. And I'm curious if she's asking for a ritual to be effective, does everyone on the team need to participate? And then there were some other questions I was catching around any tips or tricks for dialing up engagement. So it's not just the leader every time coming in and doing it. How do you distribute responsibility and leadership of a ritual?
Yep. And I will add to that, a common question that I'll get is, I want to bring rituals, but my leader's not so into it. What can I do? So collectively, I can answer the three of them together, which is, if there's, at the 40 at 4, push-up example, no, the whole company doesn't need to be doing it. It's like the healthy version of the old smoke break. The smoke break is very unhealthy, but from an engagement and connection perspective, it was pretty unbelievable. And I'm obviously not advocating everybody go out and start smoking, but we, many people talk about missing those moments of sitting outside with people. If it's your team, yeah, it's tricky if you have two people that kind of refuse to participate. The way that I approach it is, having conversations with people to say, look, let me know, is this not working for you? Here's why. It goes back to the data. Here's why, as a leader, I'm trying out some of these rituals. We're not seeing each other in person. We're on Zoom. We know that when people connect, collaboration goes up and productivity goes up, and really approaching it from a data and science perspective to try to get the buy-in of the eye roller, because there's always an eye roller. You can also get, saying, look, we're going to change what we do, but, once a month, and we can rotate, what do you think you'd like to do? Why don't you take the shot at kind of, leading that? You could also say to that person, when do you feel most, IDEO-ish, Bank of America-ish, Gusto-ish, and really trying to bring the person into the fold. And, if none of that works, it might even be raising this bigger question of what's going on. And then I think as a manager, you can begin to figure out just overall engagement. It might be something different that's kind of behind the scenes here.
Yeah. So helpful. So helpful. Thank you for sharing all of that. Perhaps one more from the community quickly. And this is related, Yasmin is asking about rituals involving the 3 Ps that have gone from on-site to remote. I know you had one example from Humu that you had shared with me, but anything there where you've seen the returns and actual impacts of institutionalizing rituals.
You mean that a ritual that was in person and now they're doing them remote? Yeah. I mean, the push-up one, like what was so funny was when I reached out to Allbirds, they would rotate, to your question about, engaging other people, and people would make videos of themselves, and it not even just doing push-ups. There was one woman who was like holding up a cat and doing squats and made this video and had a disclaimer that said, no domesticated animals were heard in the production of this video. And everybody was like laughing and connecting and remembered why they, just like the people that they work with. There was one company that they had an unbelievable in-person lunch culture. I mean, a big cafeteria, which, I think when in the middle of the pandemic, people are thinking, are we ever going to eat at a buffet? We may never, ever eat at a buffet, which is actually fine. So one of the things they started to do was when people were having meetings, they would, and this one does cost a little bit, or you could have people kind of bring their own, but they, in the beginning, were sending out gift cards saying, order in from, a local place, support a local restaurant, and let's come together and eat, and not do any, quote unquote, spreadsheets or work. Like, we're going to just come together for connect. Or they make coffee dates with people as part of the onboarding. And so I really think where there's a will, there's a way. And many of them can be translated into a remote setting.
Lovely. Well, we have one ritual here on our podcast, which is that I always get to ask you the last question. And we have the same one that we asked to lots of people, which is a personal question about what advice do you wish you had received when you were starting out in your career? Do you have anything that you
You
wish
know,
somebody told you that you know now?
I feel like when I've been asked that, like the go-to is often like, I wish I didn't get so stressed, or I wished I knew that like everything would work out. And that's always a piece of it. But something I've been thinking about a lot recently is I wish I hadn't multitasked as much, like just trying to get so much done and multitask.
Yeah.
And it might be like a weird answer, but I do feel like, given that, I'm writing about the importance of relationships and connection, yet I'm also this person that tries to be so hyper productive. And I just wish I had learned back in the day that multitasking, oh, Anita likes my answer. Thanks, Anita. That multitasking doesn't really work. And I still need to remind myself of it, but I wish I had started thinking about that earlier in my career, to say that having this conversation with you is work, right? It's not that I need to be sort of banging through this to-do list. So
lovely. That is really, really meaningful note to end on. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you to the community. Really, really great questions and dialogue with everyone today. We've been talking with author and workplace strategist Erica Keswin about powerful workplace rituals. If you'd like to learn more about these themes, please check out Erica's book and also our course, Leading for Creativity. You can learn more at IDEOU.com/leading. And we will see you next time. Thank you.
Bye.